Good morning, committee. It's Friday, January 19th. We have a bit of a lopsided table to start the day, but we are going to do our best. This morning, we are going to talk through 3 bills that are on our wall. And then I believe the floor is going to be fairly short today. Appreciate you coming back right after the floor for a conversation about corporate taxes. And with that, Representative Harrison, would you like to join us? I believe you have 2 bills. You have 20 minutes. Feel free to mix it up however you see fit.
So you don't have a preference to what order I go in?
I do not.
So let me start with H 593. For the record, my name is Jim Harrison, State Representative. I'm here with 2 bills. This one is H 593, which has a bipartisan group of co-sponsors. It was actually part of another bill last year when this part did not pass. I don't think the other bill passed last year, but this is focused on the issue of trying to provide some incentives for volunteers that serve our communities in the areas of EMS and firefighting. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, most of Vermont is served, especially in the firefighting world, by volunteer fire departments. It has been especially challenging to find enough volunteers. It's a variety of reasons, our demographics, everyone in the household working, just a whole variety of issues going on. And as a consequence, where at one time it was relatively easy to find your volunteers in a community to serve their fire departments, but for a variety of reasons, it's getting more and more difficult. So just like employers looking for a workforce, including the state of Vermont, we've had to do various incentives and whatnot to be as competitive as we can and entice people to help out. In our little town of Chittenden, small rural community, I shouldn't say it's not small geographically. We're actually the biggest town in the state of Vermont. Now, half of it might be Green Mountain National Forest, but a little factoid that it is the largest. And I can give you a little history on that, it used to be a town of Philadelphia that was just north of Chittenden, and that was disbanded by the legislature back in, I don't know, 100 plus years ago. And part of it went to Chittenden. So we have a big footprint. Anyhow, we probably in our little town could use 10 to 20 more volunteers. And it's a constant struggle to try to enlist people. And much of our fire department force, like a lot of communities, is getting older. So it's just that process is going to continue. And the same way is true on our first responder crew. I mean, fortunately, we're not too far from Rutland to use professional ambulance service, but there's only 5 EMS volunteer first responders, and of that 5, maybe one's available sometimes. So on a given call. So this bill proposes to a $500 tax credit for both EMS responders and volunteer firefighters. And on the firefighters, it's meeting, on the EMS, it's licensed by the health department, and on the firefighters, meeting standards defined by the Vermont Fire Safety Training Council. So it needs to be more closely defined. You can't just sign up and say, I'm a volunteer firefighter. There's training involved, and there might be issues that they might say, you've got to serve for 2 years, or you got to do a minimum level of actual time to qualify. So that some of that's yet to be defined. In spite of that, the Joint Fiscal Office did provide an estimate for me, and it was in the range of 2 to 3 million that would reduce revenues if, and they took the high end, perhaps. So it could be pared down a little bit, depending on how that was all defined. So I am, as you folks know, a member of appropriations, and I am extraordinarily sensitive to anything. We have a tough challenge already, and we'll be slicing and dicing some of the many requests that we received today. So I'm sensitive to any reduction. However, having the necessary force of firefighters is extraordinarily important if your house is burning, or if you have a medical emergency, of having someone available to help you as quickly as possible. So we need to figure out a way, and a lot of communities do not have the resources to be able to, have professional paid staff in these areas. So this would be, I think, a big help. Certainly open to suggestions that you folks might have to address some of this, but every year that we don't do something that might help, this problem is just going to come up. So, and a lot of that's related to our demographics. So leave it at that, but that is the issue, and I certainly encourage you to take it up and consider it. Representative Sims, as you might know, is a co-sponsor of the bill, and she's worked a lot in this area as well. So good resource for you in the committee.
Thank you. Before you continue, thank you so much for bringing this forward. You had mentioned that, volunteer firefighters and EMS are subject to specific training to get this credit, which makes a lot of sense. Do they have to pay out of pocket for that training? I'm curious about that element of things.
That's a good question. On the firefighting, my understanding is that covered actually there's a fund, and it's paid for by I believe a surcharge on insurance policies, and that covers the costs for the fire training. On the EMS, we actually have some help, and we've had this discussion in the last couple of years, and we've had to add to it. In a lot of cases, we have to, the volunteer has to pay for training, and that's another barrier. So you want me to pay $500 to get trained as a volunteer? And we've tried to, I know Drew from Rescue is here, and a couple of years ago was when they had a grant to do some free training. I was amazed at the results they got with more volunteers signing up for that when it was free. So
I don't want to make this I don't want to make this a zero-sum game, but would the money be better spent making the training free than giving people a tax credit?
Anything will help, and I would defer to Drew, if you had time to hear from him as to what the current status is. I actually introduced a couple of years ago a bill to expand the amount of money. And actually, the initial bill had a increase in the surcharge on the insurance companies, which they probably weren't too happy about. We ended up freeing up some of the existing money to make that, at least for that year, I don't know, I have lost track of what's continued in that area, but
Representative Sims and then Representative Anthony, and then I want to make sure that Representative Perry gets to talk about a second bill.
I think we're particularly grateful for the work that the Appropriations Committee has done over the last 2 years to continue to invest $1 million to cover training. So the last 2 years, we've been able to make the required training to become a volunteer available, and hoping that we can continue to do that in this coming year. There's a bill in the law about healthcare. And so to your point, I think hopefully it's not an either or, but a both and. I know I get asked about this bill a lot, like, well, why this? Like, there's sort of any number of tax credits that we could create. Do you want to say a little bit more about, why this makes sense?
a couple of years ago, I introduced a similar bill, but it was a property tax credit.
Mm.
And one of the issues that came up, and I didn't have a good answer for it, was, well, what if you live in the next town? And that was only to enable a town, if they could, to offer some kind of relief through a property tax. But if you lived in a neighboring town, and you were helping out in that community, you wouldn't be able to get the help. So that didn't happen. But so income tax affects everybody. This is proposed as a refundable tax credit. One of the ways you could narrow it is making it a non-refundable tax credit, for example. So I don't know what the difference would be on that, but it doesn't matter. Dollar-wise, yeah. But that'll be another way to limit the exposure. And I am very sensitive to the job you folks have to do this year in terms of our total budget needs.
Representative Anthony?
Yes, thank you, James. I had forgotten that there was an earlier version that focused on a town side property tax credit. I'm sensitive to the cross-border issue that poses. My recollection, whether it's call firemen or volunteers, is they have to be able to respond within a certain time. And so the cross-border thing seems to me something of a side issue. And certainly there's a more direct connection if the town has the option of forgiving for people who serve in that town, rather than the income tax for those of us who have full-time departments and pay mightily for them. Is my only quibble. And frankly, I think the property tax credit is useful because it's a credit against the homestead tax, which means that you actually have to live there full time, which I think is an important element in local government in small communities.
Sure.
Yeah, that's transience is a real problem, whether you live in rural Vermont or urban Vermont.
Thank you.
Representative Harrison, I want to make sure you have at least 3 minutes.
Yeah, on the other bill. So H 530 raises the allowable value of the home for the homestead for income sensitivity. As you know, it simply relates, the income sensitivity goes up to $400,000 on your homestead and it raises it to $500,000 for those with household income under 90,000. And if you're over 90,000, but still income sensitivity, it raises it from 225,000 to 281,000. It actually was higher than that at one point. Legislature lowered it. And so this doesn't even bring us back to where we were, I'm guessing 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever that change was made last time. It sort of flies, but it's been especially accented the last few years because of the dramatic increase in real estate pricing. I happen to have Killington in my district as an example. Like many areas of the state have had a tremendous increase in property values. So what's happening is the long-term residents who may now be seniors on modest income are really getting hit, and in some cases pushed out because the income sensitivity component of our education funding system is not what it used to be. So, and not, it's true, no one's fault, it's just value. For example, in Killington, if I can use them, their CLA is now down to like 52%. So if someone had a $300,000 house, essentially, it's now a $600,000 house in terms of calculating this homestead exemption. I got a note from a Killington senior just last week. They had an 18%.
For whatever it's worth, the CLA applies to the tax rate. It doesn't actually apply to the.
They're getting a deal.
But I will, okay. But I will tell you, we are, like, very aware of, the challenge with increased price values for, because we have had towns reappraise, and we want to make sure that towns are reappraising. It's good for all of us when that happens. And that a lot of folks who used to be income sensitized are not anymore. We also know we're gonna have to spend some time this year, thinking really deeply about how all of those thresholds work in order to make sure that Vermonters can pay their property taxes this year. So I think this bill will be very much taken under advisement as we do a lot of weighing of options.
I appreciate that. In answer to your response, and you folks live and breathe this stuff, so I expect you know a whole lot more how this all works than I do, but I did have a conversation yesterday with Joint Fiscal to make sure I got my arms wrapped around it, and I got a kind of a different answer. Maybe I asked a question wrong in terms of how the income sensitivity component works with your CLA, but I may be wrong, okay?
We're doing a deep dive on the CLA next week if you want to join us.
But I just quickly, this was from a Killington senior. Last year, they had an 18% increase because of school spending, but also because of the CLA. An 18.5% increase. This was basically from the news reports, right? Increases my fixed income and is trying to force me to leave the state. A very close friend that lives in a modest condo can't afford to keep her heat more than 50 degrees. These are long-term seniors that grew up in that area or came to this area. I totally recognize that. And by the way, that 18.5% increase for Killington this year is going to be closer to 23% because, and that's with the 5% cap on their school spending, but that's because of the CLA. And I know why we have CLA, and I know that it's not an easy change. It's just,
If the CLA wasn't there, the actual base tax rate would be higher, but we don't need to get, I'm sorry, I'm feeling very sensitive to the way everyone's interpreting it because we have, it's because we are all really, really nervous this year, Jim. Like,
we are.
we want to make sure that everyone in Vermont can pay their property taxes and eat and care for their families and maintain their housing. And like, we are, I promise you, we are deeply concerned about the exact details of your bill, and we will be taking it up this year.
Okay.
This is the most
All I
encouraging
ask.
message you could possibly get in this room.
All I ask is, and it's extraordinarily challenged going forward, so I appreciate the work you have to do. So it's, I'm just asking you to consider that. And I know there's no easy answer because when you change something on one level, it costs the ed fund money and another area gets redistributed, so.
Please tell me Killington has a reappraisal scheduled soon.
They do.
Okay.
You know, they don't, you know, I mean, you know the issues with appraisal. It doesn't just happen and there's just not enough services out there to make it happen quickly. So,
Yeah.
and
We're
just,
trying to fix that too. So thank you very much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
thank you. It's always a pleasure to visit Ways and Means.
Glad to have you here. Enjoy budget adjustment. Hello, Rebecca. Would you like to join us? I believe you're helping us understand H 545.
Yes. Thank you. For the record, Rebecca Samaroff, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Taxes. Yes, I'm here to chat briefly, I understand, about H 545, an act relating to utility property valuation. Thanks again, Rep. Canfield, for bringing this forward. It's something we're excited about at the Tax Department. So this proposal is related to ongoing valuation improvements at the department right now, specifically in the area of electric transmission and distribution. This is one utility area. Similar to other utility properties, we have a obligation under statute to assess utility properties at fair market value and then advise towns on those values. So, well, for one, we use them in the equalization study, that underpins like CLAs and things like that. But also make those available for towns to use on their ground lists, so they don't need to be responsible for valuing these, weird, unique types of properties. Sorry, with in my state of pregnancy, I have to remember to breathe in between sentences, which is Representative Odie will appreciate that. I know you've asked me to slow down before in testimony, so trying to,
Once you pass, you.
yeah, totally. It's a new world. So that's a little bit of context. I'm excited to report that we're currently near the finish line for updating the way that we calculate fair market value for this type of property, the electric transmission and distribution. We've been working with a great expert contractor, Brian Fogg, on this. And we're, nearing the finish line there. So this update to the methodology has been seen as kind of a critical need for a while, like identified before the pandemic even, unfortunately, and then that got pushed aside. This might sound familiar to this committee because in a 2022 report for this group on utility and commercial reappraisal, we actually, previewed that this work was going to happen, partially because we were going to come to you eventually with a legislative ask, which is captured in 545 right now. So exciting progress there. But part of the reason for targeting this area of utilities especially is that, stakeholders kind of across the board from towns to utility companies themselves understand that our methodology for understanding depreciation that contributes to the fair market value calculation is pretty outdated and is pretty consistently giving values that are actually below fair market value. And we know this because towns know this and have often been hiring outside contractors to, do their own values for these types of properties and then winning in court with them. They're always higher than ours. So it's like pretty clear indication that ours were in need for an update. So, and I just wanted to add just to make sure folks understand that this is all under authority that PVR currently has to manage these methodologies and update them. So this is why it was previewed in the report. This was coming, and that's all been done. And excited about that. These situations where towns are able to do a more updated evaluation and secure higher values through appeals process, like might be a win for a discrete town in that situation, but across the board, certainly not ideal when the goal of the system is for tax to provide a standardized appraisal method that gives accurate and defensible fair market values to all towns, based on the characteristics of the utility property in their town. It's also a poor outcome for our utility companies who have to, navigate, especially electric utilities that tend to operate in like 200 plus towns. We're talking about lots of.
This all makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
To me, at least. I don't know about other people. Why isn't it in the miscellaneous tax bill? Why is it living inside its own?
I think this was a timing issue, if I
Okay.
remember correctly. We were like
Like, is there
pretty sure.
special missing?
Yeah, no, we were pretty sure we wanted to pursue this,
Okay.
but like, didn't wanna, I think at the time
Okay.
of drafting, we were preferring that, we have a little bit more time with this one. So, I'm gonna fast forward because I heard that bing, just to say that, this bill, we're nearing the finish line with this model update. We will be able to provide defensible fair market values to all towns, starting with the 2025 grand list, April 1, 2025.
It's really exciting.
We're very excited about this. But the change that's contemplated in 545 would be to actually, instead of using these values an option for towns, the bill contemplates requiring towns to use these updated values in their grand lists, which is not authority we have right now to enforce.
Been to the Listers Association about this or the league about it?
Yeah, there's been discussion with those stakeholders, and I think I'm actually.
Come in to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, absolutely recommend hearing from the league, from VALA, from towns for sure. I mean, we see a lot of benefits, and utilities, I should say. We see a lot of benefits to all parties across the system, like towns will now have reliable values that they're not, that, when there is an appeal for these values, tax will handle it, our assistant attorney generals and PVR will manage that. There's no need for a town to be defending their values. So we'll take on that responsibility. I'm not suggesting that there'll be no concerns across towns because you can kind of think about this as like a reappraisal of a whole system. And, as we know in reappraisals, there's like the average impact, but I think some towns would have, see lower values, some might see higher values. Our understanding is, updating this methodology is overwhelmingly going to update values in an increased direction, but, some towns might not have that experience. But it would be a pretty poor outcome, we think, for towns to then, only choose to use these consistent, defensible, fair market values if it benefits them, and have other towns who it doesn't benefit continue to go out to contractors and kind of create this patchwork system of different methodologies across the state, which I think ultimately doesn't serve the system very well, and certainly is a drain on, the utility company taxpayers who might, rightfully feel compelled to appeal different valuation methodologies across the state. So in that sense, we think it's also a benefit to the utilities, much lower litigation costs and effort. Right now there's a lot of appeals going on with different methodologies across the state, and this would allow, if there was concerns with our methodology, just to come right to the state and manage it here. So, quick recap is that the methodology update is happening. Towns are going to have these updated values, access to them in 2025. And what this bill would consider or propose is making those values required for towns, which we think is a great idea. And I will just add that in reviewing the language subsequently, we do have some ideas to clarify the language in H 545 a little bit. So if there's just several categories of utilities that are implicated in this section of statute, and we're really focused on that one right now, the electric distribution and transmission. So we want to make sure we're clarifying that the requirement of towns to use the values would only apply to that space and not to utility values across the board. So if that sounds good to folks, we would love to work with Ledge Council to help
Please
clarify that
to Kirby.
language. Yeah. Happy to take any quick questions.
Andrews.
Briefly, Rebecca, thank you so much, or Assistant Deputy Commissioner.
There's
I think this all sounds like a really good idea, and the reason that we have this patchwork we have is because the Department of Taxes fell behind on updating this, and there was a pandemic, so I get that. And if we are going to require towns to do this, we can't get into that same situation.
Absolutely.
So I just feel like it's really important to say that.
No, yeah.
And I also think that the tax department, generally speaking, is very well run, so I don't have real concerns, but I just feel like it's.
This has been a real growing area of focus for us, as I'm sure, many folks who were here in the last biennium remember we're investing new resources into the commercial and utility space with the forthcoming CALIP program. We're going to have a lot more not only like in-house expertise with working with specialized contractors and it's absolutely the intention like to tackle each of these utility groups, one at a time going forward and have part of the updates of these methodologies is updating the way they get updated over time, which we're feeling really good about. Yeah, it's not a normal position for us to be in to like not feel like we're living up to a statutory charge. We have a lot of integrity as an organization, so this has just been an area we're eager to improve in for sure.
Thank you, Rebecca. We are gonna wrap up for the day, but when we get the new language and probably would be putting it into miscellaneous tax, we'll take some more testimony and have you back in.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Not for the day, I meant for the morning. You're welcome to be wrapped up for the day.